pressure, former Vice President Joe Biden is disclosing the diversity data of his presidential campaign staff for the first time. The newly released data reveals that 35% of his full-time staff are people of color and 36% of his senior staff are people of color. The data also shows that the majority of his staff are women, including 58% of his senior staff. The Trump campaign followed suit, revealing that 25% of its senior staff are people of color, but declined to provide information for all full-time staff. Biden has reiterated his commitment to ensuring that if elected, his cabinet would, quote, look like America from the vice president straight down through cabinet members. With me now is Chuck Rocha. He's the former senior advisor for Bernie Sanders' 2020 presidential campaign, the founder and president of Solidarity Strategies, and a New York Times contributor. Camonghne Felix is a former advisor for Senator Elizabeth Warren and vice president of strategic communications at Blue State. And Nathalie Molina Niño is an investor, the author of Leapfrog, the new revolution for women entrepreneurs, and an advisor to the Movement Voter Project. All right, Chuck, the new piece you have in the New York Times says that there are not a lot of people on campaigns who look like you, who have your life experience. How does that actually matter, and how does that actually play out in a campaign's approach?
Look around America, what's happening right now. You have all of this righteous anger in the streets. It's civil unrest. You have black people being killed in the streets by police. When we expect politicians to show up and show up on time and show up in the right place, think about who's around them. Who ran their very first campaign? Less than 20% of all congressional staff, where the laws are actually made, are made up of black, indigenous people of color. Less than 9% of all state legislatures are actually made up of anyone who is black. Less than 5% of all state legislators are made up of folks that are Latino. If you want representation and you want your voice to be heard, we need to be involved at the very beginning in the campaign and in a position of power, not window dressing, running the Latino outreach or the black outreach. We need to be in the room, as Hamilton says, where that happens, the room where the power is, to make sure that when we're making policy and the voice needs to be heard, it's at that pivotal moment right there in the beginning.
Come on, we definitely saw more race-centered policies coming out of this presidential primary than we had in years past. How much of that do you attribute to the people behind the scenes, to the diversity of the campaign staffs?
It absolutely has everything to do with the people behind the scenes, but it also has to do with the fact that Black communities are demanding to be represented in policymaking. That's part of the reason why Elizabeth saw such support from Black women and Black activists, because she was determined to make good policy, and we know that good policy can't happen without listening to and focusing on the needs of the most marginalized. Look, a candidate cannot build anti-racism into their policy work. Anti-racism in policymaking cannot be treated as an aside. It has to be centered from the very beginning, not just because it's what's good for communities of color, but because what's good and restorative for communities of color is good and restorative for everyone else. POC candidates and electeds like Congressman-elect Bowman can't be the only ones. We need more white candidates to be intentional about centering communities of color in their policy making from the beginning, if they're serious about making democracy work better for all constituents, and it has everything to do with who's hired to do that policy making.
Nathalie, it strikes me that Chuck and Camonghne look at this as people who have worked inside presidential campaigns, where you're coming at this from a different perspective, a different perch. You're making the argument that if you are an investor, if you are someone who decides where you place your money, that one of the best investments you can make at this moment is in political organizing led by Black, Indigenous people of color. Why?
Because at the end of the day, we have to have a balance to hold people accountable. And as much as it's important to me that the campaigns be structured the way that we were just discussing, there has to be organizations that are there before the elections begin, before campaign teams even get set up, and then after an election, that there be people on the ground, specifically people of color-led organizations on the ground, who are going to be there in time for the next election. And when I did the research, again, not from this world, and I thought, where is my money best spent? I want to invest in things that last. I want to invest in organizations that are going to be there well after the elections are over and are going to be knocking on those doors and making those phone calls to the people that they know in their own neighborhood, not somebody who just parachuted in for a campaign. I think we probably need both, but at Movement Voter Project, we've moved $50 million already into majority people of color-led organizations that, again, are going to sway the elections, and they're going to hold campaigns who get created and then get dismantled quickly accountable way after the elections are finished.
But Natalie, make the argument to me that you would make to an investor that this actually is good business.
I don't think that any investor, and I think it's funny when people refer to impact investors, I don't even use that terminology. If you're an investor that is not invested in destroying the planet or in the people that live around you, then you're an investor who cares about the outcomes of your investment. So all investors should be worried about another 4 years under the current administration, whether you care about humanity or the planet or just the bottom line. I'm looking at my investments, and I, for example, invest a lot in reproductive health. My reproductive health investments don't stand a chance of returning any kind of return on my investment under 4 years of an additional Trump administration. And so even if all you care about is the bottom line, nothing is more important than ensuring that we have a democracy and a functioning economy so that your investments stand a fighting chance. And so even if it's purely about bottom line, investors should not be worried about anything more than investing in the current election. And I think that this is the way. And if you're investing in people of color-led organizations, especially in the key states, especially in some of the jurisdictions that Chuck was just mentioning, then you're also looking at investing in something that lasts, that is going to continue to return on that investment for years to come.
Chuck, so much of it is about the numbers, right? But there's something more than the numbers. There's about who actually has power inside of these campaigns. How do you assess that